Look, there is a pretty big chance that the Vikings are looking for another head coach soon. And if they're doing that, we kind of got to talk about how different we want things to be. So let's have that conversation. And while we're at it, learn a little bit about coverage here on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
Ooh-wee! You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL, shows on Twitter at Locked On Vikings, and today is kind of our deep X's and O's day. I figured instead of suffering through Sean Mannion tape and being like, hey, guess what? Confirmed he's bad. Let's look forward a little bit. And I want to talk a little bit about the scheme defensively that we want the Vikings to have. And have a philosophical conversation and then a substantive conversation about the one they have now. And let's kind of decide if we want to look elsewhere. If we do want to change schemes as a defense, as a team, offense too, this is a very good opportunity to do it. If you're going to change all your coaches, you can bring in somebody that runs the scheme you want, and you can make those high-level decisions. But if we're going to talk about that, we should understand where we are coming from, and that, like, where we are right now. And to do that, we have to understand cover 7. So that's going to be the biggest, or man match is what I'll call it. That's going to be the biggest thing for the show today. Look, I want to start with the conversation about more of the same, because I think that's going to turn off a lot of people, and I want to kind of address that first. I get a lot of times I will get, whenever I mention like, hey, you know, when I would say, hey, I like Todd Bowles as a head coaching candidate. He's one of my favorites. People will say, a defensive coach, that's more of the same. And you know the definition of insanity, right? They give me my least favorite quote of all time. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. That was made by, I think it was attributed to Albert Einstein. I'm pretty sure he never actually said that. But like, that's a bad logic. That's not true. That's not true in a probabilistic sport. It's not true on a casino floor. It's not true in stocks. It's not true in business. It's not really true in life. I just don't think that you ever, if something doesn't work, that you should just never do that thing again. We got to think harder about that, right? So that's where I kind of am at in the first place. And I guess with defense, getting a defensive head coach or not, I actually don't care if he's defensive or not. He could be totally an offensive coach. He could be a defensive coach. I just don't care about that. I'm focusing more on other things. One of the things that I'm focusing on, though, is what scheme are you going to run? And whether it's the head coach defensively or you get an offensive guy and it's the defensive coordinator, we still have to think about this. And I think there's a big reason to not stray away from the man match style of defense that Zimmer runs. And I'm not talking about his aggressive blitzing style or whatever. You're going to lose that with him. I'm not talking about the way he coaches things. I'm not talking about the way he coached in the last 2 minutes of things. I'm not talking about any of those decisions. A different coach will make different decisions. I'm talking about the language that they speak, the scheme in general, that, you know, the toolbox they have to work with. All of the critiques about Mike Zimmer's deployment of those tools are what's getting him fired. Somebody else might deploy those tools differently, and I think the critiques usually apply to, I think he should have used those tools differently, not necessarily he should have a totally different, you know, we should be a cover 3 team. That's not necessarily what people are usually arguing, I find, if you were to really dig into that. So let's talk a little bit about man match and what man match is. If you might be familiar with it a little bit. You know, if you think about man defenses, zone defenses, it's a bit of an antiquated binary. It doesn't really work that way anymore because match defenses attempt to get the best of both worlds. Man match defenses have a set of rules that tell you who you man cover. It's a man coverage defense, but it's not, okay, you cover Devontae Adams, you cover Allen Lazard. It's not that. It's you cover the number one, which is the outermost receiver. You cover whoever ends up third in from the inside. And for the first couple steps of the play, that kind of thing can change. And that's the magic of man match. If you say have one guy on the outside, one guy on the inside, and they do what's called a switch release, you see this all the time where, one guy runs behind the other and then runs his route to try to confuse a man defender or maybe get a pick play or something like that. With a match defense, it's essentially you respond to that like your zone. And then once the route actually starts, boom, you start playing man. So first, let me talk about the nomenclature a little bit, some definitions. These are some things you need to know. There's a lot of memorization in terms of learning coverages. And I was learning coverages, or as I am learning coverages, I'm not done by a long shot. But from what I have learned so far about coverages, there's a lot of just memorizing stuff. I have flashcards, man. Feels like I'm back in school. You don't have to worry about memorizing all of those things, but here are some of the key stuff you just have to know to be able to keep up in the conversation. For one, know how things are labeled, like wide receivers, and it's really all pass catchers are receivers in this. They don't differentiate in their communication between tight end, wide receiver, and running back, because that doesn't really help. When who's running the go route is really what we're looking for here, and whether that's a running back or a wide receiver or whatever. We got to just know who's assigned to what. So when we're talking about it, it's just the number one isn't the wide receiver one. It isn't the most important guy on their team. It's the guy closest to the sideline. And the number two is the guy next closest to the sideline. And the number three is the guy inside of him, and so on and so forth. And then on the defensive side, it sort of works the same. The defender closest to the sideline, or the first level defender closest to the sideline. You've got safeties behind everybody, but the corner is the guy closest to the sideline. And the corner's assignment is still the corner's assignment, even in situations where, say, they motion a running back out and the linebackers are it's just the corner. The next guy in, usually a slot receiver, sometimes it's a safety, sometimes it's like a linebacker. But that guy, we'll call him the apex. I've called him the star in the past. It's the same thing. It's just different places call it different things. But we'll call him the apex for now because I like it better than star and safety. Both start with an S. I don't like that. And then the next guy in, usually it's a linebacker, is the hook. That's the third guy from the sideline to the inside. And by then, you're usually into the linebackers, you're into the middle of the field. And then you have safeties behind them both. And you have the strong side and the weak side. But it's not strong and weak the way that run plays will see it. Sometimes strong and weak is just where's the tight end in terms of a run play. This is passing strength and passing weakness, which means which side has more passing threats on it. If it's, a 3-by-1 formation, the passing strength side is the one with three receivers on it. If it's a 2-by-2 formation, which means it's kind of a tie, the passing strength is wide receivers count more for tight ends. So if there's a tight end on one of those sides, that's the weak side, and then the other side's the strong side. So you would say like the strong side safety is the safety on the passing strength of the formation. The strong corner is the corner on the passing strength of the formation. The weak corner is the other, the weak hook is the third guy in on the weak side of the field. That's the nomenclature, more or less, of who these players are. Those players get assignments. You add up all those assignments, and it adds up to a coverage. And those are the rules. And eventually, you should, in most situations, have what looks like man coverage, just straight up man-to-man coverage. Sometimes it gets mistaken for zone coverage. Before we get into this, though, I want to talk to you about Grambling. The football season's still going on. We're getting a little off-season-y here over in Minnesota because obviously we're eliminated, but you can bet on a whole mess of things. I think you can even start betting on who the first draft pick will be if you've got an idea of who's going to go first overall between those two edge rushers. You can bet on the upcoming college football games, the national championship or whatever. You can bet on basketball or hockey or volleyball or golf or Vegas casino games or whatever you want at betonline.ag. Just enter promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON. Use their wonderful, freshly redesigned website from the beginning of the season, and you can gamble on whatever you want. That promo code gets you a 50% welcome bonus. So whatever your first deposit is, 50% on top of that gets deposited directly into your account. You deposit $1,000, 500 free Grambling dollars in free play money just plopped right into your account. That is at betonline.ag, promo code LOCKEDON when you sign up. BetOnline, where the game starts. So thank you all so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen. And I hope it's because of episodes like this, where hopefully you can come away from this episode understanding intuitively a little bit more about coverages. I don't need to teach you exactly what the Vikings called here or there. I just want to teach you how it works and the language that it speaks. Because even if you want to get somebody diametrically different from Zimmer, like philosophically, they might be still using the same language and just making different decisions with it. And it's really popular in the NFL. If you decide, I don't want man match, it was Zimmer's thing, I don't want this thing anymore, you might kind of deprive yourself of a lot of candidates because it's just really popular in the NFL right now. And maybe that's another reason to go for it. But let's keep talking about how it works so that we can at least understand. And even though we'll get somebody kind of different, we'll still be able to follow their flow chart and see where it takes us. But that's essentially what man match coverage is. It's man coverage with a flow chart. And that flow chart is the assignment. So basically, every coverage will have each of its players labeled, and then you'll give each of those players a little assignment. And those assignments are just a set of instructions that usually comes in the way of a flow chart. You do this. If he does X, you go to Y. If he goes Z, you go to Z. That is kind of the way it all works. So for example, there would be a coverage call that has the apex wall number 2. His instruction is wall number 2. What does that mean? Well, number 2 is the number 2 receiver, so call him like the slot receiver probably, or maybe the tight end or whatever, and he's walling that receiver. And wall is a type of coverage technique, I guess, where you cover man-to-man against the number 2. If the number 2 goes deep, you reroute him, which means you just give him a push to knock him off his rhythm, and then become a flat zone defender. So like in a classic cover 4 zone, that's why they call it match quarters, because a lot of the default state, or a lot of the end state, the end of the bus line, if you will, if you don't get off at any of the other stops, the end of the line is you're playing quarter zone, cover 4 zone. But basically you will see the slot defender, the slot receiver, sometimes it's a linebacker, whoever the apex is, will give a push to the number 2 receiver, or he'll just cover that guy man-to-man if it's a short route. And then if it is a long route, he'll pass that guy off to the safety, push him off his rhythm to help the safety out, and then go cover something in the flat. That is one guy's assignment. And everybody has their own assignment on top of this. So with that, the safety would have an assignment that reads something like read 2-to-1 vertical. So what does all that mean, right? Well, you're reading 2-to-1. So you look at the 2 first, and then you look at the 1. And what you're looking for is vertical, which means a deep route. So if you, and that's not just a vertical route, that could be a post or a corner or whatever, any deep route. So if the 2 runs a deep route, he's getting pushed up by the apex, and then he's getting picked up by the safety. If number 2 isn't running a deep route, then the safety moves on and he goes and helps with whatever number 1 is doing, and the corner will be assigned to number 1. What I just described there is a coverage called Bronco. That's a triangle coverage, which is a 3-man coverage. Get it? And that is just those 3 players will handle the number 1 and the number 2. And it's meant for when there isn't a number 3. So there's a number 1, there's a number 2. Those 3 players handle the number 2 with that set of assignments. That's man match coverage. There are a bunch of different categories of this. So I just described to you a triangle coverage, which is 3 people. There are box coverages. Can you guess how many people are in a box coverage? You're right, 4 people. That's when there's 3 receivers on one side of the field and you want 4 defenders, so you have 4 over 3 assigned to those people. There are backside coverages, which usually are stapled to something crazy on the front side, but then you've got a nub tight end or an inline tight end and then some other receiver over there, so you need to tell the backside guys what to do. There are poach coverages, where the backside safety will help the front side of the formation, and usually that means they're trying to pick something off. You could call those robber or thieves if you've heard of that. There's also just full field coverages where you're not splitting the field in half and everybody kind of works in tandem. The real advantage, though, my favorite thing about triangle coverages are when it's a 2-by-2 formation. So there's 2 receivers on either side, running back in the backfield kind of doesn't count. Then you have 2 triangle coverages, and you can call 2 different triangle coverages on each side of the field. So these 3 guys do it one way, these 3 guys do it another way, and depending on your game plan, that can be really, really effective. So you've got 6 defenders on their 4 people, and then you're just going to have a one-on-one with the linebacker versus the running back, which is usually fine. That is when man match gets really, really fun to me, when you start to see how teams decide, why did they decide to run this particular coverage. If all of that is confusing as hell, if I totally lost you, maybe I did, probably. That's totally fine. If you're more of a visual learner or you want to take a little bit more of your time with it than you can on a podcast, there's an article at Zone Coverage that goes over a lot of the same information that I wrote. It's a big, giant, long one. It's not the kind of article you can read on the toilet. It's something you really got to sit down and take a look at, or even just reference over time, just kind of keep it bookmarked. And I hope that it can be kind of like a guidebook to you understanding coverages in a better way. I want to talk about how this applies to the future of the Vikings. Because obviously I just talked about a whole scheme that they have that they're about to fire. So let's talk about how that actually applies to next year's Vikings when it actually, is meaningful football again. But first, let me tell you about my favorite app, my favorite new app. It is Get Upside. Get Upside is a lovely little app that is free at the App Store, Google Play. You can get it wherever. Download it. It'll tell you what gas stations are participating around you where you can save money at the pump. Up to 25 cents a gallon at the pump. And if you do all that math, if you drive a lot, that's like $200-$300 a month. Like that is real savings that you get just in cash back when you go to the right gas station, whatever Get Upside tells you, take a picture of your receipt, upload it to the app, and you can just start getting cash back. That piles up in your account. You can deposit it whenever and however you want. There's no catch. There's no waiting period or anything like that. It takes like a data process, and then that money is yours. You can just direct deposit right to your bank, or if you prefer, Google Play, Amazon gift cards, that kind of stuff works too. So head on over to the App Store or Google Play. Get Upside. I have saved so much money on gas since I learned about Get Upside by doing it for this show. I am dead serious. Go get the Get Upside app and start saving money. What are you waiting for? If you enter promo code touchdown, you can actually get 50 cents off a gallon at the pump. That's double the savings on your first fill up. 50 cents a gallon on your first fill up if you use promo code touchdown when you go and get the Get Upside app. One more time. Get Upside is the app. The promo code is touchdown for 50 cents off a gallon. Okay, so let me try to drive this home in a way that makes it a relevant conversation to have today instead of a conversation we should have had like 10 weeks ago that would have helped us like watch the season, right? Because that's all very well and good, but aren't we about to move to a new scheme? So why do we care about what this one does? Well, a couple reasons. I've already kind of hinted at them. One, pretty good chance that the next guy, whether it's defensive coordinator or a defensive-minded head coach, pretty good chance that the next guy runs something similar. Now, there are different ways to run man match. The way Zimmer runs it is not the same as the way everybody else runs it. No two man match defenses are identical, right? So there's going to be a different way to utilize those tool books. They might not call Bronco as much. They might call a different one. And so maybe that can alleviate your fears of, oh my God, are we going to do the exact same thing? No, we're not going to do the exact same thing. It's like saying we're going to switch presidents, but we're still going to stay a democracy. And whoever the new coach is, the new president of defense is, might even be from a different political party, but we're still going to be in the same system of government, to use a weird analogy. Hopefully that helps people. So that's one thing that could happen. And I think we should definitely be open to that. For example, Bill Belichick runs man match. Let's say there's a weird world where the Patriots, collapse as an organization. There's only 31 teams left and Bill Belichick becomes unemployed. We probably shouldn't reject Bill Belichick as a head coaching candidate because he runs the same scheme Zimmer did and we don't want to do more of the same, right? We should evaluate these coaching candidates on what they do, and we should decide kind of separately from the fact that it didn't work out with Zimmer. We should evaluate what that scheme is generally. And I love man match. I think it's really smart, and I think its track record over the last 5 years is inarguable. All of the national championships that Alabama has won at the college level, man match. All of the Super Bowls for the Patriots, man match. Packers, man match. All of the Vikings defenses over the years that have been good, even since the changes of 2017, man match. Pat Narduzzi just won the ACC with a man match defense. It is everywhere in football, and it is dominating everything. And I would be remiss to want to move away from it just because we had somebody who pulled a few of the wrong levers. There's also, of course, the dynamic that the players in the Vikings organization right now are used to man match, so it would be an easier transition. That's not as important to me because I am sort of, until proven otherwise, unless they go do something crazy like trade for Russell Wilson or something like that, I probably see 2022 as a rebuilding year until I am proven wrong about that. So I'm not too worried about if the transition is shaky. We've got a year to kind of pull through that. And I'm okay with that. This is not about changing from a 4-3 to a 3-4. This is not about going from, a cover 3 team to a cover 2 team. This is a totally different world. This is the kind of world where the idea of saying middle linebacker becomes a lot less relevant until you understand, okay, corner, apex, hook, these are all the things. And then you reintroduce those distinctions. And a lot of coaches will call a linebacker like the jack linebacker or the buck linebacker, the joker sometimes. There's a lot of weird stuff there that you don't have to worry about unless you're like going to start coaching a high school team. But hopefully understanding that can also help you understand things like, should we keep Patrick Peterson? Patrick Peterson is a corner in this system, and he gets assignments often that are man-to-man on the number 1 receiver. I went really back and forth with somebody about this, talking about, should we keep Patrick Peterson next year? He has said he wants to come back. I actually did a whole show last week about, yeah, he should. I want to. I wrote a whole article about it and everything. And part of my argument for this was that the Vikings don't run the sort of straight up man-to-man stuff that the Cardinals were doing. The Cardinals in the last couple of years with Patrick Peterson, for the whole time with Patrick Peterson, were trying to do the thing that Zimmer used to do when Xavier Rhodes was playing like an elite corner, where you would have Xavier Rhodes shadow their best receiver, shut him down, and now you're playing 10 on 10, and that's advantage defense. For a lot of reasons, because suddenly they can't go 3-by-1 on you. This is a really cool thing about box coverages. If you have a prime Xavier Rhodes, or I don't know who's Jalen Ramsey, right? If you have a Jalen Ramsey, and let's say the other team goes 3-by-1. So they got 3 receivers on one side of the field. You need 4 defenders. That's a box coverage. A lot of the box coverages are the corner on the outside plays man-to-man everywhere he goes, Meg, on the number 1. So the corner and the number 1 match up, and you can just kind of cancel those 2 out. And then it's a triangle coverage with the last 3 over 2. The last 3 guys play triangle coverage, or what is identical to a triangle coverage, and you just sort of eliminate that. That's what a lot of box coverages are. And box coverages that don't do that are a lot more difficult because there's just one extra variable. You ever done a group project? Sometimes it's easier with 3 people to coordinate than it is with 4 people to coordinate. And so the idea that every time that you can trust your cornerback so much that every time they go to a 3-by-1 formation, you can leave that guy on an island, and you can play a triangle coverage on the inside helps a ton. And you can't do that every time with Patrick Peterson. And you can't dictate the matchup with Patrick Peterson. That's a big thing. But you can leave him on the outside. And if that means he draws the wide receiver 1, sometimes you can avoid being afraid of that. And that allows you to have your entire book of box coverages. When Xavier Rhodes started to fall off, the Vikings didn't have that anymore. So whenever another team would go into 3-by-1, necessitating a box coverage, they would have to do one of those more complicated ones where the whole group works together instead of being able to leave Xavier Rhodes on an island. And that became a big, big, big problem. And the Colts don't run anything that way anymore with him. And they're running a totally different scheme where that kind of skill set, there's more of a place for it. And that's why Rhodes has really come along, I think, in Indianapolis. And, that scheme has a different set of weaknesses, but this doesn't happen to be one of them. It's a better fit for him. Similarly, this is a better fit for Patrick Peterson, where he just covers the guy on the outside, whether that's the best wide receiver, the second best wide receiver, their move tight end, whoever that is, that's Patrick Peterson's job, and he can man-to-man on that guy. It's easier to man-to-man on whoever they put on you than it is to man-to-man on the hardest guy every single play. And that has worked out for Patrick Peterson, and that's why I like him in here. That's just a couple of the insights we can glean with this kind of understanding of coverages. I'm going to talk about coverages a lot. Now, that was just the split field, split safety coverages. There's a whole different world when it's single high safety with cover 3 and 3 match and rotating cover 3s and cloud and all that stuff. That's a totally different world. There's a totally different world when you add blitzes. These are all coverages where there's all 7 people dropping into coverage. When a blitz happens, it gets kind of weird. All of that is way different stuff. A project for another day, but hopefully you can at least understand coverages a little bit more and be able to apply that knowledge, even if you don't have all the coverages memorized and you don't have all the different what's wall and what's palms technique and what's a feather technique. You don't have to have any of that stuff memorized. Just understand how the coverages are delineated and how they're constructed. And then you can watch a given play and say, oh, I see. Okay, the safety and the apex are bracketing the number 2. that's double coverage on the number 2, and that's what their assignment is. And if it got completed to the number 2, it's because they didn't bracket him tight enough. Whose fault was that? And you can like diagnose things a little bit better. That's the sort of stuff that I want to be able to focus on this offseason, especially once we get into draft season. We start evaluating cornerbacks, which is a big need for the Vikings in the draft probably. Then we can kind of move forward from there. Tomorrow is crossover Thursday. We still have a game to do. So we'll talk a little bit about the Bears game, talk a little bit about like, what do I want to see out of this game? You know, who are we going to watch for? What do we want to see? Why watch it? That kind of stuff. We'll talk about all of that. In the meantime, check out the Locked On Bets podcast, where your boy Q and handicapping expert Lee Sterling will help you get your gambles straight. I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skol.